glad you're here. I really am. If you clicked on this video, this tells me that you and I have something in common other than an interest in spiritual alchemy. It tells me that we both belong to a club that no one really wants to be in. It's a club whose members are exclusively made up of people who have suffered some sort of profound loss and have struggled or are struggling with coming to terms with it. So, before we go any further, I just want to let you know that I am sorry for your loss. I truly am. Grief can be one of the hardest things to alchemize, and there are many reasons for that. Part of it is the way, especially society here in the United States, how it handles grief and how it views grief. I'll actually plan on doing a series of videos on the alchemy of loss, in which I'll cover some of those things in a little more detail. But what's important and germane to this conversation is that grief isn't a phase. It's not a process or something that we have to work through, even though society and even those we love may often try, treat it as such. Instead, it's more like a substance that has weight and movements. For example, it can be heavy. It may feel like something like a burden that you're carrying on your back that makes it hard for you to take that next step forward, even though you know you have to. It can be something that feels thin, as if the reality and the world around you is nothing more than a piece of tissue paper that could suddenly dissolve at any moment. Early on, grief can have sharp edges to it, and it can certainly cut. Over time, it erodes a little bit, so later grief may not necessarily hurt less, but usually it does hurt differently. And at some point, grief stops being something we feel and instead becomes something we carry with us. So instead, it's more like an element. Well, as I mentioned before, society has this pressure of dealing with your grief and talks a lot about closure and healing. Good example of this is when you look at the bereavement leave for most employers. Gives you anywhere on general here in the US between 3 to 5 days. And if you are dealing with a loss that shakes your world to its very foundation, you're probably not going to feel like going back to work in 5 days. But the world doesn't pause. The world doesn't give us time to come to terms with what's happened. There's still bills to pay and what have you. But anyhow, today I'd like to explore with you what happens when we stop asking how to get rid of our grief and start asking what it's helping us to become. Now, my own history, I've had a long history of loss. Mainly beginning when I was 16, there was a period of about 2 years there where we lost, I think it was 12 members of our family, and basically back to back. We didn't really have time to begin processing one death until we were attending another funeral. That really shaped me in my earlier life, and not necessarily in positive ways. In fact, it held me back a lot, but that's not the point of this episode. So that was hard to deal with. It was extremely hard, and that's putting it very, very gently. But the true challenge came in 2021 when I lost my wife, Sarah. It was, without a doubt, the hardest thing I have ever been through. And it's not something I would wish on anyone. Even if I had a worst enemy, I would not wish it on them. It changes you in so many ways. And when you start coming out on the other end of the grief journey, you're an entirely different person than the one who began it. I just mentioned a grief journey, and that's a difficult journey to make. It's a journey that really you often have to make mostly on your own. I'm not saying you can't get help. My therapist, when I was dealing with Sarah's death, I don't know if I could have made it without her help. So if you feel you need help, I'm not saying not to reach out for it. I'm just saying that there's a lot of inner paths that you have to walk through this journey. They are difficult, and no one can walk it for you. People can help, but in the end, you have to walk that path yourself. Of course, this is the transformative alchemist, so there is a ritual we'll be going over. I want to emphasize that with this ritual, we're not attempting to change grief, but to simply acknowledge it in its current form. You can do this seated by a fire, a candle, or even just sitting quietly with yourself. To begin with, you'll want to close your eyes, bring your attention inward, and ask yourself, where does my grief live in me right now, at this very moment? Don't try to force an answer. I mean, we're not searching for a narrative or story. We're just looking for a sensation, something that you feel. For example, is it sitting heavy in your chest? Does your grief feel like it's tightening your throat, or perhaps you've got a dull ache in your temples? It can even be that your grief feels distant and barely noticeable at the moment. There's no wrong answers. Whatever you notice is correct. But once you've located your grief, we're going to give it an elemental quality. It's not permanently, it's not even necessarily for today, but it's simply for this exact moment. You might quietly say, today my grief feels like water, or air, or earth, or fire. You can even be more specific if you'd like. You could say things like, my grief feels like frozen water, or wet clay, or stagnant air, or smoldering embers. The important thing to keep in mind is that we're not diagnosing anything here. We're just observing. Now, instead of trying to change your grief, imagine adjusting yourself around it. If you feel heavy, imagine giving yourself more support. If it feels fiery, imagine stepping back just enough to feel the warmth without being scorched. Feeling the warmth there is important. We have to feel our emotions. If we try to suppress them or push them back, it won't work. It'll eventually come out in one way or another. So allowing yourself to feel these things is extremely important on your grief journey. If your grief feels suffocating, then imagine being somewhere where there's a little more space for you to breathe. And remember, we're not trying to control grief here. That would be like trying to catch the wind in your hand. Instead, we're just trying to find ways to accompany it. You're basically saying to yourself, I see what state I'm in, and I'll adjust accordingly. Now, before opening your eyes, offer yourself a single sentence. You can do this silently or aloud, but that single sentence should give you permission to feel what you're feeling, because society often doesn't. It could be something like, this is allowed, or I don't have to fix this, or even just, this is what my grief is today. After you've given yourself that permission, take a few moments, return to just mindfully breathing for a few breaths, and then open your eyes. And that's it. There's nothing else required. There's no like alchemical tools for this one. Sometimes we just have to sit with our feelings. I hope this helps. I really do. Please know that you're not alone. We're not. If you need someone to talk to, by all means, open up. As I said at the beginning of this episode, if you feel like you need professional guidance, do not hesitate to contact a counselor. Don't judge yourself. Don't think, well, it hasn't been long enough for me to consider therapy. When I first started going to therapy after Sarah passed, it was within a couple months of her passing, and my therapist was initially shocked because she said most of her clients for, like bereavement, come to her after, it'd been about a year or so. But there are some things in life that are so big and so impactful that you immediately know that you won't be able to get through it alone, and you will need everyone in your corner who you can possibly get. And I consider myself blessed to have had that in my therapist. So, as I said, know you're not alone. Know that help is available if you need it. And as always, walk in peace and light, my friend.